Hi, welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. All rise for Sir Hector-Sants, the Right Honorable Knight of the Bankster Round Table, for services rendered to the rigging of global interest rates, for failing to arrest the perpetrators of the most brazen broad daylight bank heist still ongoing. Oh yes, Sir Hector-Sants. Stacey Herbert.
Yes, Max, I believe this is a message being sent to those of us like ourselves who are against this corrupt system where crimes are happening across the world, whether it's currency crimes, fiscal crimes. Everywhere you look, you're seeing these sort of crimes. And there's a war going on. So first I want to point to this headline, Honors List, Why Hector-Sants' Knighthood Rings Hollow. Hector-Sants' career can hardly have been a laugh a minute, but the track record of the Financial Services Authority simply does not justify knighthoods or any other official honors. So Hector-Sants was with the FSA, the Financial Services Authority, from 2004 to 2010. Now, Max, from 2007 until 2010, he was actually the chief executive when this crime wave was at its peak.
You know, the whole honor system in the UK is similar to in the mafia, when you get to be a made man. When you get to be a made man, then the other mafia kingpins can't really murder you because they would guarantee that they get murdered. So when you become a knight here in the UK, like Hector-Sants, who is he's a mafioso. He enabled massive financial fraud, massive financial criminality, worse than any mafia chieftain anywhere on planet Earth. For a reward or to make him untouchable from any prosecution, from any media. Remember, in this country, the media is such that if you were to say, Hector-Sants, you're a financial terrorist, all the local media people get all nervous and they start to cry in their Marmite. But here on this global network, we don't mind saying Hector-Sants is a terrorist because that's what he is. But we don't respect his knighthood. His knighthood means nothing to us.
Well, we made a film a few years ago about the CIA torture and rendition program. And one thing we did discover is we spoke to an expert on torture who deals with victims of torture, which were mostly from banana republics and African nations and Central American nations. Their victims were there, and there was wide-scale torture. And one of the things he said is what you notice with the CIA agents is they stayed at five-star hotels, $3,000 a night for these hotel rooms they stayed in for 3 months while looking for one target that they were going to kidnap and render and torture. Now, he said this was something that you saw through all the dictators, the classic banana republics, and it was a way to honor, and this sort of honor is a way to tell people, yeah, you think we feel bad about these crimes we've committed, these banking crimes? Well, we don't.
Well, yeah, the passage toward delusional dictatorship starts with a sharp three-piece suit. First, you get a nice suit, like John Gotti was a mafia chieftain in New York, famously. Looked great, had a great coif, and while he was murdering people. This guy, Sants, he's as we said, he's a no-good Nick, and he gets a knighthood, he gets a nice suit. Eventually, you're up the hierarchy of criminality, and you get to wear the crown. Hey, I'm the #1 financial terrorist in the world. I've got the crown. Okay, but he's working his way up. You get to be the knight, then you get to be the bishop, then you get to be the pope, then you get to be the queen, then you get to be the king, but it all works up the hierarchy of fraud.
And now the Telegraph points out that there are two contradictions with his appointment as a knight. How can the government strip Fred Goodwin of his knighthood and effectively hand it to the man whose organization failed to stop Goodwin's catastrophic ambitions in the first place? I like that they call it catastrophic ambitions. You robbed a bank, you defrauded a country. Oh, those are catastrophic ambitions.
Well, it shows you the complicity of the government, that the regulators, who are the government, get rewarded, while Fred the Shred was, taken out back and shot like Joe Pesci in the movie, I think it was either Casino or Goodfellas. I'm not completely up to date on my mafia film history. But occasionally you got to whack somebody to keep the population stupid. And of course, there's no stupider population than the victims of financial fraud around the world.
Then they ask, But also, how can the government reject the Financial Services Authority and its track record to the extent that it has passed legislation to abolish the regulatory body, yet still award its chief executive a knighthood and honor, which bestows official recognition of a job well done? So again, look to how the empire treats the people willing to commit the hardest of the hardcore crimes for the emperor. They get awarded and rewarded over and over throughout history, whether it's Timothy Geithner, who was at the heart of this global financial collapse, the fraud that led to it. He was the head of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, through which all of the fraud happened. It happened through there, and it happened through London. Who were the two regulators that oversaw this? So Timothy Geithner and Sir Hector-Sants.
Well, you mentioned empire. Of course, empire of past have referred to countries that have gone out there and colonized various other countries around the world for goods and services and gold and diamonds and things. But since the globe's assets have now been, for the most part, fully exploited, the empire has nothing left but to make the value of their looted assets go up in price, which means relying on central banks to issue hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of fiat money.
So there's another reason I think he could have been knighted, Sir Hector-Sants, and that's in the Telegraph over the New Year's break. And this article is actually not online, but it's 3 years on, watchdog fails to bite over bankers' pay. What do you think the watchdog is? That's the Financial Services Authority, Max. And apparently, the Financial Services Authority has not launched a single enforcement action against any regulated business for failing to comply with its remuneration code since the rules were introduced 3 years ago. The rules were introduced by Sir Hector-Sants, and the bankers themselves, quoted in this article, say they can't believe they're getting away with breaking all the rules on these remuneration packages.
Right. Again, the assets that have been looted, the art, the gold, the silver, the oil, those prices are going up because of the inflation that's created by not enforcing regulations. At the same time, wages have been smashed by vilifying workers and destroying unions. So that's the bifurcation of this economy, is that asset holders are flooding the system with cash to make their wealth go up, but they're not allowing that to trickle into anything having to do with a wage.
So, well, they're ignoring all the regulations about their wages. And the funniest quote from the whole entire article goes on to say, Sir Hector-Sants, the former FSA chief executive who introduced the rules and was knighted in the New Year's honors list, once warned banks they should be afraid. Sir Hector was this month hired by Barclays on a package believed to be worth as much as £3 million per year. So they don't even, I mean, they put the two sentences together, they juxtapose those sentences, and then make no reference to the fact that the absurdity of those two sentences going together.
Well, it makes perfect sense. Just like Tony Blair was hired by J.P. Morgan to exploit the oil patch after he said the war wasn't about blood for oil. Here, this guy is being hired by Barclays to zip and caboodle the money supply to make wealthy people wealthier, while the government kowtows to the same banks who are all for passing regulations to smash labor, to smash the workforce, to keep this new feudal system going.
Now, over the holiday season here, there was record sales. People were out shopping, madness, people punching each other, diving into the sales, going crazy. So not much of this was noticed. Now, in a nation like Iceland, where people are very well aware of all the crimes that were committed by bankers and who committed those crimes, we see something like this. Executives at collapsed Iceland bank jailed for fraud. Two former executives at an Icelandic bank, which collapsed in the 2008 financial meltdown, were sentenced to jail on Friday for fraud, which led to a €53 million loss and the first major trial of Icelandic bankers linked to the crisis. So this was actually the chief executive officer of Gleitner Bank, the first bank to collapse post-Lehman, and also the former head of corporate finance. They were both jailed for 9 months.
Right. Well, it's two countries with two different perspectives on justice. Iceland has a more developed sense of what is just. So they put criminal like a bankster in jail. In the UK or the US, they have a very poorly developed sense of justice. So they elevate banksters and terrorists to positions of authority to make it easier for the gangsters and the banksters to steal more money.
Now, compare this story to, say, MF Global and John Corzine, who was connected, very good friends with President Obama. Prosecutors said the two approved a loan to a company which owned shares in Gleitner so that the company could, in turn, repay a debt to Morgan Stanley. So, of course, this loan was never repaid. And for this, they're doing nearly a year in prison. Whatever happened to John Corzine? He's running a hedge fund.
Yeah, exactly. And the government is printing more money to pay the missing payments, which will debase the currency for workers and wage earners, but raise the assets of the banksters.
And so let's go over the sea a little bit to another small island nation, and that is Ireland, which chose to bail out the bankers of their crime wave. Emigration at famine levels as 200 leave country each day.
So private equity groups like Blackstone or KKR are moving into Ireland because the asset values are good for trade. They'll make money trading those assets, the housing and the infrastructure, to line their pockets. Meanwhile, the young workforce is getting out of the country because they're being targeted. They've been marked for death, haven't they, by the hedge funds, by Henry Kravis and his friends over at the private equity sphere of influence. They've been marked for death. So instead of just sitting there being targeted by these guys, they're leaving the country.
And now, speaking of being targeted and marked for death, of course, Occupy Wall Street is dead, dead, dead. Revealed how the FBI coordinated the crackdown on Occupy. So this is an article written by Naomi Wolf, and it's based on Freedom of Information Act documents that emerged over the Christmas holidays, of course, so not a single American other than Naomi Wolf has noticed this. And the new documents show that the violent crackdown on Occupy last fall was not just coordinated at the level of the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and local police. The crackdown was coordinated with the big banks themselves. So these are all of the biggest banks. They had a bank security group that met with the FBI, targeted specific activists, including some, this is all redacted, for assassination. And Naomi Wolf then says, there's a new twist. The merger of the private sector, DHS, and the FBI means that any of us can become WikiLeaks, a point that Julian Assange was trying to make in explaining the argument behind his recent book. The fusion of the tracking of money and the suppression of dissent means that a huge area of vulnerability in civil society, people's income streams and financial records, is now firmly in the hands of banks, which are in turn now in the business of tracking your dissent.
Right. If Mussolini were alive today, he'd be running J.P. Morgan. All right, Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half. I'll be speaking to John Perry Barlow.
Something lies beneath. Thousands of meters of ice and rock. The labyrinth that is a lure for many. But dangerous even to those who keep it at a distance.
Join me on a journey to the heart of the Kremlin, to places hidden from the tourists. You're gonna meet some real Kremlin insiders, although they may not be the usual newsmakers you see on TV.
More news today. Violence has once again flared up.
These are the images the world has been seeing from the streets of Canada.
Giant corporations rule the day.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to San Francisco and speak with poet, essayist, lyricist John Perry Barlow, founding member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Barlow is out with PressFreedomFoundation.org, a site that provides you with an easy way to donate to journalism organizations dedicated to transparency and accountability. John Perry Barlow, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Howdy, Max. Nice to almost see you.
All right, fantastic. So John Perry Barlow, along with Daniel Ellsberg, famous whistleblower, and John Cusack, famous movie star, you have set up a new website called PressFreedomFoundation.org. Tell us about it.
What we're doing, essentially, is finding our way around the financial embargo that was imposed on WikiLeaks back in 2010, when they first started to make serious trouble for serious people. That is to say, reveal things that also in their function revealed the incompetence or wickedness or malignant intent of various parts of the government. And at that time, two congressmen, Joe Lieberman, senator from Connecticut, and Peter King, a congressman from New York, went to Amazon and got WikiLeaks to take its servers off of the Amazon cloud. And then they went to PayPal, Visa, and MasterCard and essentially persuaded them that WikiLeaks was a terrorist organization and that they should not have the benefit of credit card flow-through for donations. And this had a devastating effect on funding that organization. They've been limping along on a shoestring ever since. Well, it occurred to Dan Ellsberg and me that it would be unlikely that if we set up a kind of flow-through conduit to patch around this embargo and made enough of a fuss about who we were and what we were doing, that it was kind of unlikely that the government, or rather private individuals, private corporations, would come in and place another embargo on top of us.
John, what happened to the Internet? I mean, I heard you speak in 1995 at an Internet conference about the freedom of the Internet. It was kind of like the greatest thing since dropping acid. You yourself was a lyricist for the Grateful Dead, and there was this big love-in the mid-90s that the Internet was going to bring back freedom. But now everything's encrypted. Everything is being surveyed. The Internet has been trashed by centralized governments and the corporations behind them. What happened to the Internet, John?
Characteristic understatement, Max. No, I don't think that. I think the Internet actually is doing just fine. I think that there is and continues to be a Mexican standoff between the forces of liberation and the forces of surveillance and control. The Internet is a very powerful force field inside of human affairs, and even as it allows many people that could never have had a voice in the past to speak up, there's never been a better surveillance tool than the Internet. So, I mean, we can expect this back and forth. But I would say that in sum, the Internet is definitely living up to all of my most libertarian dreams about how it could enable human discourse. And I could point you to places all over the planet where the Internet is making it possible for people to say things that couldn't have been said before, to make changes in their governments, to overthrow old governments. But by the same token, it is being used in just those places to surveil political activity. I've been doing the Electronic Frontier Foundation now for over 20 years, and I would say that it's been a dead heat throughout, that I have no good reason to back away from my dream and expectation that someday the Internet will give everybody everywhere the ability to say what's ever in his heart and have the other people who might be interested in it actually hear that message.
John, the government just renewed the ability to have unfettered access to people's emails on the Internet. People no longer trust the Internet. If the people don't trust their own email box, they don't trust the Internet, and they have a government that is spending hundreds of billions on militarization of the economy, and China is now saying that they're going to have a registered access list, and you know, the encroaching forces of the man are becoming manifest in a huge way. But let's talk about specifics. For example, PayPal has also frozen the account of PRQ, the famed Swedish ISP. Your thoughts on this trend of financial corporations cutting off individuals for political speech or activism? That sounds like a trend that's growing, John.
Well, I don't know that it's growing. It certainly has reared its ugly head. You know, I mean, and you find it in a lot of different ways. I mean, Comcast, which is a very major provider here in the United States, won't let you get through to Pirate Bay. And there's nothing you can say legally. You can't go to Comcast and say, well, I have a right to have access to Pirate Bay, because you don't have any rights with Comcast except for whatever they may have conceded you with their terms of service agreement. The same applies to Apple. Apple applies very censorious standards, and believe me, they have to do with freedom of expression with what appears in their app store, which is essentially fascism. And there are many, many different organizations that are in a position to do this to you, and nobody's in a position to tell them to stop.
All right, so John, you describe yourself as a libertarian, and this, of course, would suggest that people have the right to their own money and that this money should be anonymous to a great degree. What about this trend that we're moving away from anonymous cash to being every single transaction on the web? Obviously, you're trying to get to this with your organization. Do you feel that you can successfully do an end run around this trend toward every single transaction being registered with the central database, number one? And number two, I don't hear you mentioning Bitcoin, and yet Bitcoin seems to be a huge part of the solution, or maybe I'm missing something. Is Bitcoin part of what you're doing?
You know, we will accept donations in Bitcoin. Personally, I think Bitcoin's got a ways to go before I consider it to be a reliable and fungible currency. I think that it's somewhat subject to manipulation, but it is actually reaching a point where I think it's an increasingly reliable currency. But, you know, a really reliable currency has to be credible in all venues. You can't just have the sort of Unix weenies thinking that Bitcoin is good. You've got to have the people down at the grocery store thinking it's good. And we're a long ways away from that. In the meantime, though, I think that there are things that we can do to kind of obscure the application of money. So, for example, with what we're doing with the Freedom of the Press Foundation, we've got 4 different organizations that will be shifting around. WikiLeaks is likely to be one of them most of the time, but we have 4 different organizations. You give money to the Freedom of the Press Foundation. You establish on a slider how you want that money divided up. We use encryption to make sure that your identity and how you divided your money is obscure, and you can't actually get into that database, even with a subpoena, and find out who gave what. So you have essentially anonymized your donation.
What about this idea, though, John Perry Barlow, that the folks at Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal can act extrajudiciously to decide what is in the best interest of the public? How are they able to get away with that? Or is it just another financial crime, like all these other bankers are committing financial crimes without any prosecution whatsoever? It's a 2-tier justice system. Your thoughts?
It's not a crime. I mean, they're a private business. They have a perfect right to handle transactions for whomever they see fit.
Yeah, but John, they're subsidized by the government. There's a government utility. Visa, MasterCard are public utilities, quasi-public. It's like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We're not private institutions either. They're government subsidies. The people own these things. They own these architecture. They own the infrastructure. They can't just willy-nilly decide that they're going to allow this to work or not work on a day-to-day basis. That's completely tyrannical. It's absurd to justify this in any way.
It may be absurd. It also happens to be legal. I beg to differ with you.
But the laws are written by the finance companies. The laws are written by Visa and MasterCard in these banks. And here in the UK, HSBC just got caught laundering money for terrorists, laundering money for drug launderers. They're clearly breaking the law. And their defense was that if you come after us, we're going to crash the financial system. That was their defense. How is that tolerable?
Well, it's tolerable. You know, it's kind of like the same reason that animals lick their genitals. They do it because they can. You know, I mean, they can get away with this. I'm sorry. It is not. There's a lot of stuff that they're doing that is against the law, but with regard to deciding that they will or will not do business with WikiLeaks, that's something that any business has the right to do. In any event, you know, we were able in the last week, in a week's time, by setting up this new foundation using real dollars, not Bitcoin, using PayPal, Visa, and MasterCard. We've so far managed to raise $125,000 in all of it in donations under $100.
What if Anonymous, which is kind of the sheriff out there on the internet, at least somebody has some kind of moral grounding, they decide that they take a look at your organization and they say, you know what, you guys are in bed with Visa and MasterCard, and that's really not going to be in keeping with the mission statement of WikiLeaks or Anonymous, and they go after you guys. What's your recourse, or what do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I think that would be much sillier than I generally think Anonymous is. I'd be very surprised if they did something like that. We're not in bed with Visa or MasterCard. We've just managed to use them to get money to WikiLeaks, which they'd otherwise refused to do. We set up another entity that receives donations on behalf of WikiLeaks and several other extremely important organizations. And, you know, there's a very important point to be made here, which is that what we're trying to do is to fund other things that are really like WikiLeaks. We want there to be a proliferation of transparency journalism sites where people can shovel in material that they think is sensitive from inside institutions, whether they're governmental or business, material that they think the people have a right to know, and that there will be people there who will edit that material and bring out the stuff that is most important for whatever reason, whether it's heinous or even because it's great. Whatever is going to increase public awareness of what institutions are doing.
All right. Well, it should be noted that the revolutionaries in Tunis, of course, very publicly thanked Anonymous as the only ally they had in the West and was instrumental in the entire success of the Arab Spring. But John Perry Barlow, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Sure. Yeah, nice to almost see you guys. I hope we're together in the same place soon.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, John Perry Barlow. If you want to send me an email, please do so at KeiserReport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.